Hey guys, welcome to the Let's Kill It podcast. I cannot believe I'm saying this, but it's been such a long time in the making because I've wanted to do this for so long. I love long form content. For those of you guys who know me, you know that I love watching YouTube videos, I love watching podcasts. Even on a personal basis. And I've been wanting to do this for a very, very long time. A lot of you guys may not know this, but building a podcast or creating a podcast was actually one of the first few things that I wanted to do in business, but it never really quite materialized for whatever reason. And so now that it's finally happening, I'm actually really, really excited. Interestingly, I created the RSS feed and also the Spotify account on 11/11, which is also my birthday. So I thought that was quite apt. But aside from a little rambling, welcome to our very first episode on the Let's Kill It podcast. And today's topic is something that I'm so excited to talk about. It is how can one balance entrepreneurship versus relationships in life that matter? Now, just as a little preface to this, I think when I first got this question, relationships was really referring to romantic relationships or partnerships, but I think you can really apply the same concepts for a lot of my answers to this on just important relationships in your life in general. So let's dive into the first question, and that is, do you ever feel like entrepreneurship just consumes your life and leaves you no time for other things that matter? If that's the case, should entrepreneurs just date other entrepreneurs? Well, first things first, I think it's a great question because there is this general perception that entrepreneurs are always hustling, entrepreneurs, they're always going at it 24/7. And I think that's the whole concept of hustle culture, which we really won't get into for this episode. But there is that general sentiment. And I think, bottom line, I think we intentionally make time for the things that matter to us. And obviously, this is just my personal opinion. And as for whether entrepreneurs should date other entrepreneurs, I think that's ridiculous. I mean, like, do doctors only date doctors? Do, photographers only date photographers? Do chefs only date chefs? Obviously not. And I think at the end of the day, there's so many other factors that ties into whether or not you are compatible to actually make a serious relationship work, assuming that that's what you want, of course. And on a personal level, I believe it's about finding someone who really understands your life goals, which include multiple areas like work, relationships, your social life. There's so many areas to your life goals that goes beyond purely just work, right? So I think it's about finding that someone who really understands your life goals, and as well as you understanding their life goals, and to be able to see how you can mutually support each other in that. And I think that if you find it really, really difficult to support this person in their life goals and vice versa, then I think it might really be a compatibility issue. But if you are able to do that once you guys establish that, I think that's great, because then your partner becomes like really your biggest cheerleader in life, not just work, but so many other aspects of life as well. And your biggest cheerleader and your biggest supporter. And obviously, you do the same for him or her or them, and I think it's a really, really beautiful thing to be able to find someone that you can connect with deeply and to feel like you're never alone in that sense, because a partner shouldn't take away from your life goals. They should add to it. They should be supporting you in it, and for you to do obviously the same as well. And I think if it is important enough to that person, they will prioritize you and you will prioritize them similarly as well. And one thing that I really believe in is that you should never be at a place where you force your partner to prioritize you or be put in a position where you are the one that's being forced to prioritize your partner. Because if this relationship is important enough to you, you will prioritize them. And if it's important enough to them, they will prioritize you. And if they don't, then it's really time to think about whether you are okay with that or not. Like, they're not prioritizing you. Are you okay with that? And it's really not the be all and end all, because let's be real, there are seasons in our lives, right? Some seasons are for us to really be doubling down on work. Some seasons, for example, if you're like a new mom or a new dad, then it might be a family season, right? Where you just spend a disproportionate amount of time, or just a bigger emphasis on focusing on family, for example. And so you really want to think, if in this season, if it is a season, if my partner is not actively prioritizing me, is that something that I'm okay with? And if you are, and if it's just a season, I think that's perfectly fine. But it could also be that maybe you guys drifted apart, and that's why it feels like, this person is just not prioritizing you, and he or she or they are not making time for you. And that might also be, the tip of the iceberg, or a little red flag signifying bigger issues in your relationship. So you really want to decipher that. So to the question, do you feel like entrepreneurship just consumes your life and leave you no time for things that matter? I don't. I think that it's important to define your life goals. And if you're supportive of each other in a romantic partnership, then it's great. And it's something that you're willing to do. It's not really something that's like work is pitted against my personal relationship. It's like it all kind of ties back into my life goals. I want to succeed at work. I want to succeed at building a really deep and meaningful relationship with my partner. So to me, they all tie into your bigger life goals. And the question is whether or not your partner understands that and supports you in that, just as you understand it for them and supports them and support them in that endeavor as well. To me, that's what a real partnership should look like, in my personal opinion. All right, let's move on to question 2, which is, have you ever fought with your partner over business priorities versus personal priorities? What was the situation like, and how did you resolve it? Well, first off, I want to say I think everyone's situation is definitely unique. So I'll just talk about my personal situation, right? So when I first met my partner more than half a decade ago, I was in a corporate 9-to-5, but at the same time, it was a relatively flexible 9-to-5, I would say, which is really fortunate for me, my working style, and also fit in pretty well into my relationship. So things like, meeting earlier for dinner or later for dinner, or even meeting for lunch or working on the weekends, things like that were pretty flexible for me, and it was quite normal for us. There was no like significant adjustment issues, or any situation where, our calendars would just look so different that we had found it very difficult to spend some quality time together. Probably the only thing I would say was that we both really love traveling, and because of a max annual leave that I was permitted at the time at my day job, holidays were probably the only thing. So my partner was an entrepreneur and I was in a 9-to-5 at that point. In my current context, both of us are now entrepreneurs. And I think there are also pros and cons to that. I definitely don't think it's a situation where just because the two of you are in a 9-to-5, or just because the two of you are, running a business, that you wouldn't get into conflict. So in my particular situation now, the pros are that obviously there's a natural understanding of nuances, right? Like, for example, sometimes you just have days where there's so many things to do in your business. It might just be a peak season. It might be a launch kind of timing. And it's just a very densely packed few days or weeks that you just know that time is dedicated. And I think we have that natural understanding that that's just how it works. Sometimes erratic schedules come up, or sometimes a client just calls you and it's just unavoidable for certain really urgent situations, right? Or you have a random meeting that just got rescheduled. I think those are things that we have a natural understanding for, which is really good because you don't really have to kind of justify it to each other. But I think there are also cons to that. Us both being entrepreneurs, we're both so occupied sometimes, like sometimes I feel like we're just building our own businesses because as entrepreneurs, your baby is your business, right? And so then sometimes your partner naturally, just by you spending 24/7 kind of in your business, the partner sometimes becomes a second priority for each person, which can lead to other issues in the relationship. And so I think in that you really got to be ultra intentional about setting aside non-negotiable times where you don't work at all, or you don't check your phone, or you don't respond to clients. So that's something that we are quite intentional about. Sometimes we even have like no phone days, for example, and really just spend that quality time with each other, so that work and entrepreneurship and running your business doesn't take over your whole life. Now, don't get me wrong. If your work is really your number one priority and it's like overwhelmingly your priority in this season of life, I totally respect that, right? So I speak for only myself. Relationships are really important to me. They're one of the most important things in life, in my view, right? So that's why I really want to make sure that I'm intentional in terms of investing in that and not letting it fall into a natural situation where work just takes up like 99% of my time and I have to split that 1% between like family, social life, me time, partner time, and so many other things. I would say something else that would be a little more difficult would be when we were in different seasons of the business. For example, like one of us might be in peak season and a little bit more established versus the other one of us might be a newer entrepreneur and going through a whole different season. Or we might have seasons where one of us is really busy and the other one is relatively free just because of client cycles and things like that. I think that also ties into a really real thing, which is about different earning potentials. And I do think it's really important to talk through money matters very, very openly and very, very transparently in your relationship, especially if you're in a serious relationship, and especially if you are in an entrepreneurial career or a sales career or any form of career where money matters can be a little bit more volatile. So usually these are situations where your earning capacity and your income is not fixed, right? So you could be like commission based, you could be running your own business. No 2 months are ever the same as opposed to like a very stable 9 to 5 job. So I think in situations like this, it's very important to be open and transparent about where you are with money, what you're comfortable with, what your current season is like in business, because it's a very real thing. It affects your lifestyle. It affects whether or not you can go for holidays, whether or not you can have like special treats at maybe even like certain restaurants, for example, right? So these are all very real things that you want to be thinking about and communicating openly about. At least for me, these are things that are really, really important to me that I should take care of in a relationship. Question 3, have you ever had situations where you regret putting so much emphasis on your work until you realize that your relationships are actually suffering? Wow, this is like, how do I even unpack this? I feel like if you asked me maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I was someone who would put like maybe 99.99% emphasis on work. I think that's my natural inclination just because I'm very driven and I'm a very like all or nothing person where if I want to do a project, and this obviously plays out at work, if I'm on a project, I want to give it like my full effort, my full energy, my full everything, right? And so obviously that comes at a sacrifice because I'm not I'm not superhuman, I'm not superwoman. And if I give 100% of my efforts into something, that comes at a cost because I have nothing left for the other areas of my life that might also be really important. However, if you ask me now, I do feel that I'm a lot more balanced, and a lot of self-work obviously has been done into this as well. I do feel that I am now someone with quite a bit of clarity, I would say, on what is important or what is of priority to me. And for me, there are a few main spheres. I would say work, romantic relationship, meaning my partner, my family, as in my direct family, friendships or social life, and then also self, which is me time, or my relationship with myself. I would say the two that are suffering the most right now, or tend to be a little bit more neglected, despite my best efforts to, make sure that it's as balanced as possible, would be friendships and self. I would say like the social part, maybe because I'm a natural introvert, I don't get rejuvenated by hanging out in large groups. I really enjoy one-to-one conversations, but I think because of the way that I'm a little bit more introverted, I don't usually find it very natural for me to constantly be initiating meetups. And sometimes it means that the social life suffers a little bit, because if I'm invited, sometimes I say yes and sometimes I say no, but I'm never really the one initiating a meetup, which is also something I'm trying to work on, especially for friendships that are very important to me. I've really, I think, realized as the years go by the importance of having like really good, solid friends or a support network that you can journey through life with. And obviously, we know that real life, comes with highs and it comes with lows as well. So that's one area that I'm definitely trying to work on. And I think the other area that maybe suffers a little bit would be the self area, right? So things like, getting enough sleep, making sure that my body is really rested and that my mind is clear as it can possibly be, or even things like physical health, which is why recently, fun fact, on my birthday, one of the first things I did was sign up for gym membership and some basically workout classes. I just felt like this was one of the areas that I really am not that good at. Okay. So I decided to do something about it. And then the second thing was I created the podcast. So that's a little fun fact. But back to the self aspect of things, I feel like sleep and physical health is something I definitely have neglected compared to the rest of the areas in life that are important to me. Emotional health and mental health are strangely things that I've always been actively working on. I don't know if it's because I'm naturally a little bit more introspective, or I don't even know if it's because I realized that emotional health and mental health are things that are actually very important for my business, right? I don't know if it's a work hazard, because I know that when I'm emotionally down or when I'm mentally down, it impacts the way that I show up in my business. And that affects, a lot of things: my client experience, the way I show up on social media. It affects my sales, my conversion, and so many other things. So mental and emotional health are things that I'm always prioritizing. But back to the question, I feel like I put relationships and work so much on priority that they're not really pitted against each other. But at the end of the day, it's like me or myself, quote unquote, that actually suffers, right? So I actually push like sleep and physical health to the back, and then I focus a lot on like important relationships in my life, as well as work and career. So obviously that's not the most sustainable thing. So that is also something that I've actively been working on. I'm not 10 out of 10 yet for sure, but it is something that I'm intentionally working on, and something that I've seen a great improvement in, actually, compared to even just last year or the year before. All right, so number 4, what is more important to you, business or relationship? Wow, this is the $1,000,000 question. I think each person should decide for themselves what's important to them. And I think the most important thing is really for you as an individual to be clear in your own head what is important to you. So I don't feel like that's a right or wrong answer, or whether business should be more important or relationship should be more important. For me personally, the answer is always relationships. I think human beings are social beings, and a part of me has always been longing, I think even ever since I was a little kid. Like, I've always craved and longed for meaningful relationships. I've always craved and longed for friends that I can really talk to, right? About like the bad stuff, the dirty stuff, the imperfect stuff that happens in life. And relationships are very important to me. So for me, deep down inside, the answer is always relationships. But I think clarity is really, really important because it helps you decide what you actually end up doing on a day-to-day basis, right? Otherwise, you end up in this, and I think a lot of you guys might be able to relate, because when you don't have clarity, you end up in this cycle where you feel guilty, you feel anxious, you feel stressed when you work. And then when you work, you're like thinking about your relationships and how you're like neglecting them and not spending nearly enough time as you would like. But then at the same time, you also feel guilty and you feel anxious and you feel stressed when you spend time in your relationship. For example, you've planned like a really nice day out to the beach, and the whole time you're thinking about your work and your growth because you know you're an entrepreneur and there's always so much more you can do in business. So when you're in one place, you're thinking of the other thing. And when you're in the other place, you're thinking of the first thing. And you really end up in this really horrible situation because you end up not being present in any of those situations. And it really tires you out. And none of these are really optimal situations, clearly. So you want to be clear on not just what's important, but also break it down to what's important now. So you want to be clear on what is the most important thing for you long term, but also what is important for you in this particular season of life. Because when you have that clarity, you're going to be very clear that, okay, I'm sacrificing or I'm spending slightly less time in my relationship right now for this period. But 1 year later, after I get through this like really crazy period at work, I'm going to be intentional about rebalancing it. So you have this timeline in your head about the season and when you're actually going to recalibrate things. And I feel like that's really important, because the danger comes in that if you know that it's peak season at work, for example, but you also feel like your relationship's really important to you, but you don't have that clarity and timeline in your head, you just keep working and working and working. And even after a year, say after the crazy peak season at work, you're so used to working all the time that that's what you naturally end up doing. And then you continue past the peak season to disproportionately put your efforts, your energy, your emotions, your health at work instead of in other areas of life. And that's when the other areas of your life really suffer this prolonged time of neglect. And obviously, without nurture, if this keeps going on and on and on, they end up suffering, and some of them end up dying, for lack of better terms, right? They end up really suffering and you might lose them. So I think that clarity, along with the specifics of the timeline of a particular season, is going to allow you to act on something without feeling the guilt and stress and anxiousness, because you know that it's just a season. And you also know exactly when you're going to rebalance and recalibrate things so that all the important things in life are taken care of and they're looked after, and you know it, and people around you know it as well. So that's one thing that I would definitely say is important to do. Number 5, What is one advice you'd give to someone who wants to kill it in managing and balancing work versus relationships? Well, so if you haven't gotten the sense by now, I definitely think this whole thing about work versus relationships is very wrong to me. It shouldn't be work versus relationships. It should be work and relationships. But to answer that question, how do I really manage and balance work and relationships? I think clarity and action, like I'm always thinking of mindset and action, clarity and action. I think these are really the most important core tenets of getting something done, right? So you definitely want to have clarity on where you want to go, what are your goals, and then take action to work towards them. Because if you don't even know what your goals are, you're going to be stumbling around, tottering around, spending a lot of time and energy. And by the way, you can be spending a lot of time and energy, but whether or not it's productive, whether or not your actions are actually leading you towards your goals, that's a whole different story, right? And if you don't even know what your goals are, like if you don't even know the end point, how do you know where to drive? How do you know where to walk? If you don't know what your goals are, you definitely can't even begin to work on them, or you definitely won't be working on them very effectively, right? So if you're at the point of, okay, I've now gotten clarity on my goals, I've now gotten clarity on what my goals are, and you pause and you realize that your current actions are not actually contributing, or they're not aligned to your goals, then it's time to recalibrate, then it's time to tweak that accordingly. But you can only do that with clarity. At the same time, having clarity is definitely not enough. You want to have the clarity and then take action accordingly, so that every single thing you do is literally bringing you one step closer to your goals. And this doesn't just apply in business or sales, this applies in life in general, right? So that's all from me today on entrepreneurship / career versus relationships and relationships. If you are still watching or listening, I just want to say a big thank you for spending this time with me. Feel free to also leave a comment on what other topics you'd like to see on business, life, mindset, really anything at all that you'd like to see, and I'll see if I can make it happen for you. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on this podcast. That's really the best way that you can show your support, so that we can get this show to more people around the world looking to kill it in their business and life. I really appreciate you, and I'll see you very soon.